Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. I am your host, Jyotsna Kumar. The border between Israel and Lebanon has witnessed daily exchanges of fire between Israeli forces and the Iran-aligned Lebanese militant group Hezbollah since the outbreak of Israel-Hamas war on the 7th of October. Both sides, wary of an all-out war, have for long employed tough talk as part of a mutual strategy of deterrence. But fears of a full-blown war escalated this month after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that Israel was preparing for a very intense operation on the border with Lebanon. Hezbollah's chief, Hassan Nasrallah, also threatened a war with no restraint and no rules and no ceilings in case of a major Israeli offensive against Lebanon. Shelling on Israel's northern border has intensified, leading to the evacuation of tens of thousands from both sides of the frontier. United Nations has warned that such a conflict would be potentially apocalyptic. Our next report explores the rapidly escalating conflict.
The Israel-Hezbollah conflict, which so far has largely been limited to the border area, is threatening to escalate into a wider regional conflagration. On Thursday, Hezbollah said that it fired dozens of Katyusha rockets at a military base in northern Israel in retaliation for Israel's strikes on southern Lebanon a day earlier. The Shiite Muslim movement claimed 2 other attacks on Israeli troops and positions the same day, including one with drones. Tel Aviv claimed that its Iron Dome air defense system intercepted most of the rockets fired from southern Lebanon. Though the current fighting between Israel and Iran-backed Shiite Islamist movement is still relatively contained, it marks their worst confrontation in 18 years. Their last war in 2006 was a month-long conflict. Widespread damage to buildings and farmlands in South Lebanon and northern Israel narrate a tale of destruction and despair. The border zone on both sides has largely been depopulated, with tens of thousands of people fleeing their homes. The violence has resulted in deaths of more than 450 people in Lebanon, most of them fighters, but also including at least 90 civilians. Whereas on the Israeli side, at least 15 soldiers and 11 civilians have been killed. Last Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the phase of intense fighting against Hamas in the Gaza Strip is coming to an end, which would allow Israel to deploy more troops along the northern border with Lebanon.
After the intense phase is finished, we will have the possibility to move part of the forces north. And we will do this, first and foremost, for defensive purposes, and secondly, to bring our evacuated residents home. If we can, we will do it diplomatically. If not, we will do it in another way. But we will bring all the residents home, all the residents of the north as well as the residents of the south.
Couple of days later, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, in a meeting with his Israeli counterpart Yoav Gallant, stressed the significance of diplomacy in resolving the escalating conflict.
So diplomacy is by far the best way to prevent more escalation. So we're urgently seeking a diplomatic agreement that restores lasting calm to Israel's northern border and enables civilians to return safely to their homes on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon border.
The next day, Israeli Defense Minister Gallant, while addressing reporters in Washington, D.C., said that Israel does not want a war with Lebanon, but was capable of sending Lebanon back to the Stone Age. Analysts are of the opinion that it is easier said than done. Hezbollah is much closer to a regular army, boasting a considerable rocket arsenal and even tanks. Not merely a terror organization, the challenges posed by it will be far more potent.
That Hezbollah does have much stronger, much heavier warheads on their ballistic missiles that have not been used yet. And so the fear is that if this was to escalate and Hezbollah would unleash its full potential, that the ballistic missiles that were to be used, that could be used against Israel, would be far more damaging, with massive warheads that would cause the sort of destruction and have an area effect that would be very significant.
The United Nations Humanitarian Affairs Chief Martin Griffiths has called Lebanon the flashpoint beyond all flashpoints. A full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah would be catastrophic, especially for people on both sides of the border. The situation resembles a powder keg. A little spark could end with the whole region up in flames.
The Russian Republic of Dagestan was jolted by a spate of terror attacks on 23rd of June. 2 synagogues, 2 Eastern Orthodox churches, and a police post in 2 of the largest cities of Dagestan, Derbent and Makhachkala, were simultaneously attacked by armed men on Sunday evening. At least 21 people, including 16 police officers and a Russian Orthodox priest, were killed and 46 others wounded in the deadliest terror attack in Russia since March. At least 5 of the attackers were also killed in the ensuing gun battle. So far, no group has claimed responsibility for the attacks. But the attack on Christian and Jewish places of worship has given rise to suspicion that the predominantly Muslim region of Dagestan is facing a renewed militant Islamist threat. The Russian authorities, though, have pinned the blame on Ukraine and the West without giving evidence. As Russia focuses its resources to counter threats from Ukraine, has it turned a blind eye to the danger posed by homegrown Islamist violence? Our next report explores more.
Pentecost, also known as Trinity Sunday, is one of the most important holidays in the Orthodox calendar. But the celebratory mood turned somber on Sunday evening, as gunmen attacked an Orthodox church and a synagogue in the ancient city of Derbent. Around the same time, the insurgents were on a rampage in Makhachkala, the capital of Dagestan and its largest city, targeting a church and a synagogue there as well.
Today has become a day of tragedy for Dagestan, and not only for Dagestan but for our entire country. Unprecedented in their cruelty, terrorist attacks were committed today against religious sites in the capital of Dagestan, Makhachkala, and our ancient city of Derbent.
Faced with this audacious coordinated attack, the security forces launched an anti-terrorist operation. Long into the night, the gun battles raged, resulting in the deaths of at least 5 assailants. Following the attacks, 3 days of mourning was declared in Russia's North Caucasus region of Dagestan, which borders Chechnya and is one of the poorest regions of Russia. Sunday's attacks came just 3 months after more than 140 people were killed, when gunmen opened fire at a rock concert in the Crocus City Hall in suburban Moscow. It was the deadliest attack in Russia for almost 20 years. Russia had claimed without evidence at the time that Ukraine had a role in the Crocus City Hall attack, despite Islamic State in Khorasan province, which is based in Afghanistan, claiming responsibility for the attack. Analysts are of the opinion that Islamic State and other jihadist groups are discussing and increasingly grabbing the opportunity that Russia's war in Ukraine presents them.
The Islamic State, and especially the Khorasan branch, the one in Afghanistan and Pakistan, based there, in their magazines, in English language and in Pashto language, but also recently in the Tajik language one, they have been writing articles, all articles, about how Ukraine is the so-called, as they call it, black hole for the West and Russia, meaning that while the West and Russia is focusing their attention in Ukraine, jihadists can take advantage of this situation and strike.
Not long ago, Dagestan was a hotbed of extremism in the 1990s and 2000s that had spilled over from neighboring Chechnya. Economic and social issues of high unemployment and rampant corruption were feeding the radical ideas of extremism. Recently, though, Russian security forces appeared to be winning their battle against armed insurgents. But these recent terror attacks are a grim reminder that the threat from militant Islamists is far from over.
The South American nation of Bolivia washed in shock and bewilderment as President Luis Arce thwarted an apparent attempted coup on 29th of June. The man leading the attempted coup d'etat, Army General Juan Jose Zuniga, was arrested on live television hours after he led troops and tanks to storm the presidential palace in the capital, La Paz. But General Zuniga, before his arrest, created an uproar, alleging without providing evidence that President Arce himself had ordered the general to stage an uprising in order to trigger a crackdown that would make President Arce look strong and boost his sagging approval rating. Is there more to the attempted coup d'etat than meets the eye? Our next report explores the tumultuous day and its ramifications.
On Wednesday afternoon, reviving memories of Bolivia's long and sordid history with coups, troops and tanks rolled into Plaza Murillo, a historic central square in La Paz, where the presidency and Congress are situated. One of the 8 tanks tried to break down a metal door of the presidential palace to allow soldiers to rush in. Addressing the nation, the Bolivian president, Luis Arce, called the mobilization, which lasted about 5 hours, an attempted coup d'etat, and asked people to mobilize for democracy.
To the Bolivian people and the entire international community, the country today is facing an attempted coup d'etat. Today, the country once again faces interests so that democracy in Bolivia is ruined. Here we are, the national government with all its ministers firm, with a vice president firm here in Casa Grande, to confront any coup attempt, any attempt that threatens our democracy. The Bolivian people are called today. We need the Bolivian people to organize and mobilize against the coup d'etat in favor of democracy. We cannot allow once again coup attempts to take Bolivian lives. We want to urge everyone to defend democracy. Long live the Bolivian people. Long live democracy.
A few hours later, soldiers withdrew from the central square and Bolivian police regained control of the plaza. The alleged mastermind of the attempted coup, Army General Juan Jose Zuniga, was arrested and forced into a police car as he addressed reporters outside a military barracks later the same day. A second senior officer, Juan Ernest Salvador, who was head of the Bolivian Navy, was also arrested the same night. In total, 17 people were arrested for their alleged involvement in the attempted coup. Reportedly, the alleged conspirators had begun plotting in May. A new set of military chiefs were appointed by President Arce after the attempted coup. Speaking to the media before being arrested, General Zuniga, who was recently stripped of his military command, alleged that President Arce himself had requested him to stage the coup attempt in order to push up his popularity.
On Sunday in La Salle College, I met with the president, and the president told me the situation was bad and this week would be critical, that it was needed to prepare something to push up his popularity. And I asked him, shall we take the armored vehicles out? And he said, take them out. Then on Sunday night, the armored vehicles started to go.
Zuniga, appointed by Arce as general commander in 2022, had held high military ranks in his past as well. However, the relationship between Arce and Zuniga had soured recently, with Zuniga criticizing Arce in the week leading up to the attempted coup. Criminal action has been initiated against Zuniga under Articles 121, 127 and 128 of the Penal Code. Zuniga is staring at a maximum possible sentence of up to 20 years in prison. The next day, President Arce refuted Zuniga's allegations of an auto coup, denying any involvement or prior knowledge of the failed coup attempt.
First, on the alleged information General Zuniga gave us, not at all. We were never informed of what he intended, even less the mobilizations he conducted, but we were surprised by these facts. He was disobeying and failing to fulfill the orders his Captain General gave him. So how could it be an instruction or planning of an auto coup?
Whether Zuniga acted on his own accord or was merely a pawn in the Game of Thrones in the Andean nation is up for conjecture. But the country, which has witnessed dozens of coup attempts since 1950s, surely has a worrying Wednesday.
At least 23 protesters were killed and hundreds wounded during nationwide protests against tax rises in Kenya on 25th of June. The largely peaceful protests, ongoing for days, escalated on Tuesday after MPs passed an amended, deeply unpopular finance bill. A section of the parliament building in capital Nairobi was set ablaze by angry protesters who had broken through police lines to storm the parliament. On the same evening, a defiant Kenyan President William Ruto labeled the protesters organized criminals and accused them of participating in a treasonous event. A day after, in a dramatic reversal, Ruto declared that the bill containing contentious tax hikes would be withdrawn. But protests have continued, with protesters now clamoring for President Ruto's resignation. Our next report brings you more details.
The East African nation of Kenya was rocked by nationwide protests beginning last week, a result of widespread discontent and anger over proposed tax hikes. These protests have largely been organized by young people through social media. Initially perceived to be understanding, President William Ruto's government was caught off guard by the intensity of these protests. Tensions escalated on Tuesday when Kenyan police, clad in full riot gear, blocked access to the parliament, where lawmakers were debating the controversial finance bill. They fired tear gas, water cannon and rubber bullets in a bid to disperse hundreds of mainly young protesters.
There is no criminality in assembling in the streets. I was there in the morning. I have seen the unprofessional police force. We don't have a police service. They should scrap off that nonsense and call them a police force. They are here brutalizing innocent citizens who are unarmed, who are only speaking because the president has successfully captured parliament. He has successfully captured the judiciary. The only surviving sovereign power is the people. Now he's trying to brutalize us.
The defiant crowd broke through the police lines to storm the parliament, vandalizing the interior and setting sections of the parliament on fire. The ceremonial mace, symbolizing the authority of the legislature, was stolen in the mayhem. Reportedly, an overreacting police had resorted to live ammunition even before the parliament was breached.
I'm here to address you. You must go. Ruto must go.
The pandemonium was described as akin to war. In a national address the same evening, President Ruto, condemning the events as treasonous and an unprecedented attack on democracy, vowed to quash unrest at whatever cost.
Today, Kenya experienced an unprecedented attack on its democracy, rule of law, and the integrity of its constitutional institutions. An otherwise legitimate expression of the fundamental rights and freedoms of assembly, demonstration, picketing, and petitioning of public authorities by a section of law-abiding citizens of the Republic of Kenya was infiltrated and hijacked by a group of organized criminals.
The next day, the Kenya Human Rights Commission condemned Ruto's decision to crack down on the protests, expressing outrage at the killing of protesters by police forces and questioning Ruto's decision to deploy armed forces.
It's not protesters who are treasonous. It's Ruto's acts that are treasonous. These killings were further exacerbated by the deployment of the Kenya Defence Forces, KDF. The deployment, per the Special Gazette notice the Defence Cabinet Secretary Aden Duale issued, is illegal. Article 241 2C of Kenya's Constitution says that National Assembly must first approve such deployment, and this has not happened. There is nothing that justifies the use of live bullets on protesters. But this regime positions snipers to shoot and kill unarmed protesters.
On Wednesday, in a major climb down from the hardline rhetoric, following an extraordinary demonstration of people power, President Ruto said he would withdraw the finance bill containing the controversial tax hikes. The announcement came in his second address to the nation within 24 hours.
Consequently, having reflected on the continuing conversation around the content of the Finance Bill 2024, and listening keenly to the people of Kenya, who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with this Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 Finance Bill, and it shall subsequently be withdrawn, and I have agreed with these members that that becomes our collective position.
The proposed legislation was part of efforts to cut the country's massive debt burden of more than $80 billion, which cost the country more than half of its annual tax revenues to service. The proposed legislation would have benefited farmers, students and teachers in a country where a third of its 52 million people still languish in poverty. But in a democracy, the people's voice is paramount, and the Kenyans have spoken in a loud and clear voice.
Why are you doing this? Why?
And that's all we could pack into this edition of World at War. Thanks for watching.